Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Count of Monte Cristo, chapter 64, Maximilian. Villefort rose, almost ashamed at being surprised in such a paroxysm of grief. The terrible office he had held for 25 years had placed him far outside the range of any human feeling. He looked at Morel in a half-dazed manner. "Who are you," said he, "that you are unaware that one does not enter a house where death reigns? Go! Go!" Morel stood still. He could not take his eyes from the disordered bed and the pale figure lying on it. "Do you hear me?" cried Villefort, while d'Avrigny advanced towards Morel to persuade him to leave. Dazed, the young man looked at the corpse, the two men, and the room. Then he hesitated for a moment and opened his mouth to reply, but could not give utterance to any of the thoughts that crowded his brain. He thrust his hand in his hair and turned on his heels. D'Avrigny and Villefort, distracted for a moment from their morbid thoughts, looked at one another as though to say, "He is mad." But in less than 5 minutes, they heard the stairs creaking under a heavy weight and perceived Morel carrying Noirtier in his chair up the stairs with almost superhuman strength. Arrived at the top, Morel set the chair down and wheeled it rapidly into Valentine's room. Noirtier's face was dreadful to behold as Morel pushed him toward the bed. All the resources at the disposal of his intelligence were displayed therein, and all his power was concentrated in his eyes, which had to do the duty for the other faculties. His pale face, with its glaring eyes, seemed to Villefort like a terrible apparition. Every time he had come in contact with his father, something disastrous had happened. "Look what they have done," cried Morel, resting one hand on the arm of the chair he had just wheeled up to the bedside, and with the other one pointing to Valentine. "Look, father, look." Villefort started back and looked with amazement on this young man, almost unknown to him, who called Monsieur Noirtier father. In response to Morel's words, this old man's whole soul seemed to show itself in his eyes, which became bloodshot. The veins of his throat swelled, and his neck, cheeks, and temples assumed a bluish hue. Nothing, indeed, was needed to put the finishing touch to this internal ebullition in his whole being but the utterance of a cry. And in truth, a mute cry issued from him, if we may use the expression, which was terrifying and heartrending because of its very silence. D'Avrigny rushed up to the old man and made him inhale a strong restorative. "They ask me who I am, monsieur, and what right I have to be here," cried Morel, seizing the inert hand of the paralytic. "Oh, you know. Tell them! Tell them!" And the young man's voice was choked with sobs. "Tell them that I was betrothed to her. Tell them she was my darling, the only one I love on earth." And looking like the personification of broken strength, he fell heavily on his knees before the bed, which his hands grasped convulsively. His grief was such that d'Avrigny turned his head away to hide his emotion, and Villefort, attracted by the magnetism which draws us towards such as have loved those we mourn, gave his hand to the young man without asking any further explanations. For some time, nothing was heard in the room but sobs, imprecations, and prayers. Yet one sound gained the mastery over all the rest. It was the harsh and heart-rending breathing of Noirtier. With each intake, it seemed as though his very lungs must burst asunder. At length Villefort, who had, so to say, yielded his place to Morel, and was now the most composed of them all, said to Maximilian, "You say that you loved Valentine and that you were betrothed to her. I was unaware of your love for her, as also of your engagement. Yet I, her father, forgive you, for I see that your grief is deep and true. Besides, my own grief is too great for anger to find a place in my heart. But, as you see, the angel you hope to possess has left us. Take your farewell of her, and sad remains. Valentine has now no further need of anyone but the priest and the doctor." "You are mistaken, monsieur," cried Morel, rising onto one knee, and his heart was pierced with a pang sharper than any he had yet felt. "You are quite wrong. Valentine, as I judge from the manner of her death, not only needs a priest, but also an avenger. Send for the priest, Monsieur de Villefort. I will be her avenger." "What do you mean, monsieur?" murmured Villefort, trembling before this new idea of Morel's. "What I mean is that there were two possibilities in you. The father has done enough weeping. It is now time that the magistrate bethought him of his dignity." Noirtier's eyes gleamed, and d'Avrigny drew nearer. "I know what I am saying," continued Morel, reading the thoughts that were revealed on the faces of those present. "And you all know as well as I do what I am going to say. Valentine has been murdered." Villefort hung his head. D'Avrigny advanced a step farther, and Notier made a sign of assent. You know, monsieur, continued Morel, that nowadays a girl does not suddenly disappear without inquiries being made as to her disappearance, even though she be not so young, beautiful, and adorable as Valentine was. Show no mercy, monsieur le procureur, he cried with increasing vehemence. I denounce the crime. It is now your duty to find the murderer. You are mistaken, monsieur, replied Villefort. No crimes are committed in my house. Fate is against me. God is trying me. It is a horrible thought, but no one has been murdered. I tell you that murder has been committed here, cried the young man, lowering his voice but speaking in a very decided tone. This is the fourth victim during the past 4 months. I declare that they attempted to poison Valentine 4 days ago, but failed owing to Monsieur Notier's precautions. I declare that the dose has now been doubled, or else the poison changed, so that their dastardly work has succeeded. You know all this as well as I do, for this gentleman warned you both as a friend and a doctor. You are raving, monsieur, said Villefort, vainly endeavoring to escape from the trap into which he felt he had fallen. I raving, cried Morel. Well, then, I appeal to Monsieur d'Avrigny himself. Ask him, doctor, whether he remembers his words to you in your garden on the evening of Madame de Saint Méran's death when you and he thought you were alone. You were conversing about her tragic death, and as now you unjustly blamed fate, but the only blame that can attach to fate is that by her decree the murderer was created who has poisoned Valentine. Yes, he continued. Recall those words that you thought were spoken in silence and solitude, whereas every one of them fell on my ear. On seeing Monsieur de Villefort's culpable indifference toward his relatives that evening, I certainly ought to have revealed everything to the authorities. Then I should not have been accomplice to your death, Valentine. My darling Valentine. But the accomplice shall become the avenger. I swear to you, Valentine, that if your father forsakes you, I shall pursue the murderer. And then it was d'Avrigny's turn. I, too, join Monsieur Morel in demanding justice for the crime, said he. My blood boils at the thought that my cowardly indifference has encouraged the murderer. Have mercy. Oh, my God, have mercy, murmured Villefort beside himself. Morel raised his head, and, seeing that Notier's eyes were shining with an almost supernatural light, he said, Wait a moment. Monsieur Notier wishes to speak. Do you know the murderer? He continued, turning to the old man. Yes, replied Notier. And will you help us find him? Cried the young man. Listen, Monsieur d'Avrigny, listen. Notier threw at the unhappy Morel a sad smile, one of those smiles expressed in his eyes which had so often made Valentine happy and demanded his attention. Then, having, so to say, riveted his questioner's eyes on him, he looked toward the door. Do you wish me to leave the room? Asked Morel sadly. Yes, looked Notier. Alas, have pity on me. The old man's eyes remained relentlessly fixed on the door. May I at least come back again? Yes. Am I to go alone? No. Whom shall I take with me? The doctor? Yes. But will Monsieur de Villefort understand you? Yes. Have no fear. I understand my father very well, said Villefort, overjoyed at the inquiries between him and his father were to be made privately. D'Avrigny took the young man's arm and led him into the adjoining room. At length, after a quarter of an hour had elapsed, a faltering footstep was heard, and Villefort appeared on the threshold. Come, said he, leading them back to Notier. Morel looked fixedly at Villefort. His face was livid. Large drops of perspiration rolled down his face. Between his teeth was a pen twisted out of shape and bitten to half its natural length. Messieurs, said he in a voice choked with emotion, turning to Avernet and Morel, give me your word of honor that this terrible secret shall remain buried forever amongst ourselves. The two men stirred uneasily. I entreat you, continued Villefort. But the culprit, the murderer, cried Morel. Fear not. Justice shall be done, said Villefort. My father has revealed to me the name of the culprit, and though he is anxious for revenge, as you are, he entreats you, even as I do, to keep the crime a secret. If my father makes this request, it is only because he knows that Valentine will be terribly avenged. He knows me, and I have given him my word. I only ask 3 days. Within 3 days, the vengeance I shall have taken for the murder of my child will be such as to make the most indifferent of men shudder. As he said these words, he ground his teeth and grasped the lifeless hand of his old father. Will this promise be fulfilled, Monsieur Notier? Morel asked, while d'Avrigny questioned him with his eyes. Yes, signaled Notier with a look of sinister joy. Then swear, said Villefort, joining d'Avrigny's and Morel's hands. Swear that you will spare the honor of my house and leave it to me to avenge my child. D'Avrigny turned round and gave a faint yes in reply. But Morel pulled his hand away and rushed toward the bed. Pressing his lips to Valentine's mouth, he fled out of the room with a long groan of despair. As we have said, all the servants disappeared. Monsieur de Villefort was therefore obliged to request Monsieur d'Avrigny to take charge of the numerous arrangements consequent upon a death, above all upon a death of a suspicious nature. This he consented to do and went in search of the official register. The register duly gave the death certificate without having the least suspicion of the real cause of death, and when he had gone, d'Avrigny asked Villefort whether he desired any particular priest to pay over Valentine. No, was Villefort's reply. Fetch the nearest one. The nearest one is an Italian priest who lives in the house next to your own, replied the doctor. Shall I summon him? Pray do so. Do you wish to speak to him? All I desire is to be left alone. Make my excuse to him. Being a priest, he will understand my grief. D'Avrigny found the priest standing at his door and went up to him, saying, Would you be good enough to render a great service to an unhappy father who has lost his daughter? I mean Monsieur de Villefort, the procureur. Ah, yes, I know that death is rife in that house, replied the priest in a very pronounced Italian accent. Then I need not tell you what service it is he ventured to ask of you. I was just coming to offer myself, monsieur, said the priest. It is our mission to forestall our duties. It is a young girl who has died. Yes, I know. I learned that from the servants whom I saw fleeing the house. I know that she was called Valentine, and I have already prayed for her. Thank you, monsieur, thank you, said d'Avrigny. Since you have commenced your sacred offense, continued it. Come and watch beside the dead girl, and all her mourning relations will be grateful to you. I am coming, monsieur, replied the priest, and I venture to say that no prayers will be more fervent than mine. D'Avrigny led the priest into Valentine's room without meeting Monsieur de Villefort, who was closed in his study. As soon as they entered the room, Notier's eyes met those of the priest, and no doubt something particular attracted him, for his gaze never left him. D'Avrigny recommended the living as well as the dead to the priest's care, and he promised to devote his prayers to Valentine and his attentions to Notier. The abbé set to his task in all seriousness, and as soon as d'Avrigny had left the room, he not only bolted the door through which the doctor had paused, but also the one leading to Madame de Villefort's room, doubtless that he might not be disturbed in his prayers or Notier in his grief. The Abbé Busoni watched by the corpse until daylight, when he returned to his house without disturbing anyone. When Monsieur de Villefort and the doctor went to see how Monsieur Notier had spent the night, they were greatly amazed to find him sitting in his big armchair, which served him as a bed, in a peaceful sleep, with something approaching a smile on his face. What, pray tell, did that priest say to Monsieur Notier? We shall see. See you next time.